For those of you who follow me on this channel, last week I roasted on the Ikawa Pro 100 for the first time. This week I'm going to create a profile on the Ikawa and talk to you about how I did it, why I did it, and the outcome. So stick around. All right, thanks for joining me today and welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab. I've been roasting on an Ikawa Pro 100 for the last week. My last video showed me doing a roast for the first time. I downloaded the profile from the Ikawa library, roasted that profile, and got to understand the roaster functionality, the capability, just the ins and outs of the roaster. I haven't totally mastered it, but I'm pretty comfortable now, and so the next step is for me to create a profile. And that's what this video is all about, is me trying to create a profile and the process that I go through and ultimately the end result. This roaster was lent to me from a friend who owns a coffee shop, Trevor from Sabbath Coffee. Sabbath Coffee rules. You guys need to check out Sabbath's YouTube channel. He's got some pretty funny videos to check out. They're unorthodox videos. So check that out. And Trevor, thanks for letting me use the roaster. A link will be in the description to his videos. But he let me use this roaster, and I, this week, took advantage of that completely. And instead of just using a profile from the library, I created my own profiles. And I experimented because my goal was to try to create a profile that matched the flavor profile, what I taste every week from a Guatemalan Weiwei coffee that I roast on this roaster. This is a drum roaster. So before I create this profile, one of the things that's really important is, in order to do this, we have to have a basic understanding of roasting concepts. I've been talking about the 3 phases of coffee roasting here on this channel for quite a while, and it has helped a lot of people. It's definitely helped me. It's what I pay attention to and how I roast. So if you're not sure what that is, check out the playlist I have up here in the corner on coffee roasting essentials. That's really going to be helpful for you. Understanding what happens with the phases, each of the phases while we're roasting and how that influences the flavor is really, really important. There's a great book that's out there that Rob Hoos wrote that I've shared on this channel, and it is Modulating the Flavor Profile of Coffee. That is an awesome resource. You can find that. I'll have a link for that in the description as well. And that kind of shows you some of the things that I even did here in this video I learned from Rob Hoos. So I would encourage you to do that. I'm also applying my past experiences with roasting on different types of roasting devices, as well as this drum roaster, and different types of coffee. Because really this is all about temperature over time. It's really about us understanding how the coffee is going to be changing while we roast it at these different elements, these different phase times that we are roasting our coffee in: the dry phase, the browning phase, and the development phase. And how those percentages for each of those phases can influence the flavor as well as the total roast time. So what I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to start with a profile that I'm very familiar with that I roast on this drum roaster all the time. But I'm going to use different roast lengths in my experimenting here today, and that's one thing that really affects the flavor of the coffee, how long you're roasting it. I want to show you a snippet of one of the roasts that I did just so you can understand how the Ikawa displays what's happening during the roast. Here you'll see there are several lines. The red line, as we mentioned before, is the bean temperature. This is the temperature that's being read from the probe that's on the top of the roasting chamber. The yellow line is the inlet temperature or the exhaust temperature. That is the air temperature of the hot air blowing in at the bottom of the roaster into the coffee, and that's being measured by a sensor. And then there is the white line that you see horizontally going across the lower portion of the screen. That's the fan speed that is being adjusted along the way. And then the other white line that you'll see show up here is the rate of rise. All right, so the profile that we're going to be using, we have to start somewhere. And so the best place to start And with the Ikawa, in order to create a new profile, you have to start with an existing profile and then edit it. So I started with the profile that I used last week. It was an 11-minute roast. It was way too long. The coffee was kind of dull. It wasn't really exciting. It was just too long of a roast and too flat of a profile. So this time I'm going to take that profile and I'm going to edit it. And the question is, how do I know what to do? Well, I'm going to start with what I know in my past experience with this drum roaster and even what I've been recommending to you guys, and that is a profile that is half the time that I'm roasting this coffee is devoted to the dry phase, 30% is devoted towards the brown phase, and 20% is devoted towards the development phase. But I'm not going to do an 11-minute roast. I'm going to do a 7-minute roast. So I did, as you can see with the coffees that I have laid out here, these are just some of the roasts that I did. I probably did maybe six or eight different roasts. I've got 5 laid out here, and each profile, you can see I've got some of the profiles visible here that you can see, and you can look at the total roast times and how they changed. 7 minutes, 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes, 9-minute profiles. I experimented with these different length profiles. And so that was one thing that I wanted to try to get a feel and determine was what is the total roast time that I am going to end up with? What am I going to try? And so I experimented with these different profiles, the total roast times. I also experimented with the phases. I started with the 50, 30, 20. I also went to a 45, 35, 20, and I kind of experimented with that and the different total roast times to end up roasting a coffee that was pretty good. And we'll talk about that at the very end. So this is really trial and error. But the good news is that we're roasting small batches of coffee. I'm roasting 100 grams of coffee at a time. So I burned through less than 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds of coffee, just experimenting with this. And if I would have tried to do this on my drum roaster, I would have had to probably blow through 5 pounds or more of coffee just because of the design of the machine. And it's very difficult to roast very, very small batches, under capacity batches in a roaster like this. It was nice to use the Ikawa roaster because it has repeatability, and changing these profiles only took me a couple of minutes, and then I could immediately start roasting that coffee. So it didn't take long to roast all these different coffees. All right, so in this clip, I am showing you how I go into the edit mode. I'm looking at the roast library. I choose a roast. It opens that roast up, and then I hit the edit mode, and immediately you'll see a bunch of different dots that point to different times on the timeline as well as different temperatures. So you need to just touch a dot and you can move it up and down to increase the temperature at that time point, or you can move that time point. You'll see me move the time point from I think it was 8 minutes to 8.5 minutes. You'll see it in the video there. But you can see me moving these different points around to adjust the profile. How did I know what percentage or what time? We talked about that a little bit based on past experience. There were 2 different phase profiles that I was going to experiment with for this Guatemalan Huehue coffee, and several different total roast times. So here we can see I moved the total roast time to make it a little longer. It's really interesting when you change the total roast time like you see me doing here, it ends up changing all of the phase percentages, and so you have to go to the different points and make modifications. One thing that's really helpful is to understand your roaster and its capabilities so that you know the temperature range of when your coffee turns yellow. It's different for every roaster. On this roaster, it turns yellow about 340 degrees unless I'm really pushing the roast and I've got a short roast or I'm dragging the roast out. About 340 degrees, the coffee is going to be full yellow. That is the color I'm looking for. No green, full yellow. That's when I call dry. So I need to make sure that my dry phase time is adjusted properly if I'm changing the total roast time. Same thing with the temperatures along the way. If I'm changing the end temperature, that may influence or cause me to want to adjust some other temperatures within the timeline. And the Ikawa follows those points. It ends up, as far as temperatures go, each of these dots moving upward is a step up in the power level, in the energy level. The white line on the bottom is the air that is being used, how much fan is being used, and I didn't make any changes to that through all of these profiles. I didn't want to mess with that variable, at least at this point. And so the coffee that I showed you, I went through each of these profiles, I made the edits that I needed to make, and the interesting thing is that I could taste the differences. Some of them were subtle, but from one spectrum to the other, I could definitely taste the differences. And what I ended up with was really enjoying roast 1.4 and roast 1.5. Those roasts were, the 1.4 was about a 45%, 35%, 20 profile at an 8-minute roast. And then the 1.5 was a 50, 30, 20 for an 8-minute roast. I think it was 8 minutes. It'll show the total roast time on the screen there. But both of those coffees, when it was all said and done, tasted very similar to the drum roaster. They were, both of those coffees, one had maybe a little more body than the other, one had maybe a little more acidity than the other, but generally speaking, it was really close to what I roast here on this drum roaster. Now, the interesting part is that at an 8-minute roast on the Ikawa equated to about a 10-minute roast on the drum roaster. So that's what, a 20% difference in time gives me a similar roast profile. I'm not saying that's how it's always going to be, but that's what it was in this series of tests that I did. So the end result is I had a lot of fun roasting and experimenting with this coffee. I ended up getting some really good tasting coffee. I'm very happy with the result from that. And I learned a lot. So my question to you is, have you experimented on different roasters? And have you seen a difference in total roast times between those devices? Whether it's an air roaster, whether it's a handheld roaster, or some other type of roasting device, have you noticed differences if you're using different devices? I really enjoyed doing this video. I learned a lot. It was fun to zero in. Tasting the coffee, it's like, well, okay, well, this is too bitter, this is too tart, this is kind of flat, and you work through these different changes, and it was really an interesting concept and an interesting test, and I learned a lot from that. You know what? One of the things that I need to figure out next is there a way to take this and transfer this profile to another larger roaster? So for example, I did it backwards. I kind of went in backwards with this and went and started to use my knowledge from a larger roaster and apply it to the Ikawa here. But really the question is, how do you take a profile that you've done on a really small device and then apply that to a larger roasting device, or even a different type of roaster? We're going to talk more about that, but just this week, Meg over at Black City Coffee just did a video. It was coincidence. She's got an Ikawa home unit, and she talks about how to transfer a profile from a small unit like that to a drum roaster. So check that video out, and I'll have a link for that in the description as well, so you can just click on the link. One more thing, next week we are going to be roasting on a brand new home coffee roasting model. This is something I've never roasted on before. It's probably one of the most popular coffee roasters out on the market, and so we're going to do that together. You're going to see me learn how to use this thing from the very beginning, and we'll see what happens. If this is the type of content that you like, then hit the like button. That really helps other people find this channel, other new home coffee roasters or people that enjoy home coffee roasting. And if you hit the subscribe button and also the alert bell, that really helps my channel out. That supports me, and I appreciate you guys doing that. All right, so next week I will have this new roaster to show you, and I hope that you guys have a great week roasting. We'll see you next time.